Specialist in the corner. Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back. Finally, a little bit of a hiatus there. A lot going on. John coming down to see his beloved Blue Jackets win, lose. I have no idea. I don't watch hockey until it's May. But anyway, he came down to America to watch. Yes, John, I did that purposefully. He came down to America to watch the Columbus Blue Jackets play hockey and had a great time in the process. So we've been off for a little bit, but we are back tonight with number 64 of our top 100 movies of all time. John's got Scream. I've got The Tree of Life. We are 11 days away from Halloween. It is full-blown spooky season. That's pretty much all I've been watching, whether it's good or bad, such as I Know What You Did Last Summer, which I really don't understand how that's even classified as horror. But anyway, Scream and The Tree of Life, two very different movies. One of them is scary because it'll make you, kind of feel scared that somebody's going to murder you, and another will make you feel scared that your life is meaningless and it's all going to end soon anyway. So, John, welcome to the podcast. Welcome back after about 2 weeks off here.
Yeah, it's been a while, and it was fun. It was fun going to Ohio. I know a strange statement to be said, but I did enjoy myself down there. But it's nice to get back in the swing of things and talking about movies again.
Have you ever listened to The National, the band?
Yes.
Okay, their song Blood Buzz Ohio. That's what I always think of whenever anybody goes to Ohio. So, I'm pretty sure that song's actually about like addiction. But anyway, Blood Buzz Ohio. That's what it is. If you can't figure out what a blood buzz is, sorry, we'll talk about deeper things like The Tree of Life on this podcast anyway. But we got Scream and Tree of Life. Now, we're going to definitely talk about The Tree of Life first because one of these movies was actually watched by people. The other wasn't. So, Scream, John, what is it about Scream, though? I just want to bring this up before we get into anything. What is it about Scream that sets it apart from other horror movies? Because you're a huge horror fan. You like this like kind of like schlock horror. I know it's not schlock, but it's kind of like that. They're being your face with the absurdity of horror, a lot of the movies that you end up choosing. What is it about Scream that kind of puts it up there for you that would put it this high in your rank? Because this is very high.
This is high, and I watched Scream twice in the last week, and it might not be high enough in my ranking, in all honesty. But I think a lot of it comes down to the meta commentary that Wes Craven brings to this film and really helps bring a lot of attention to the slasher genre, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it.
Yeah, but first we're going to discuss probably one of the most fun movies you're ever going to watch in your entire life. Grab your bowl of popcorn, grab your best friends, and let's all go giggle at The Tree of Life, Terrence Malick's deep movie. The movie that put Jessica Chastain on the map, though. This is actually the year that put Jessica Chastain on the map. She was in The Help and this in the same year, and look at what her career has become since. She was an unknown before this happened, and it was funny. The year that this came out, my dad and I went to see a performance. I wouldn't even call it a performance, but it was like a night with Al Pacino. And so we went to this little theater in Red Bank, New Jersey, where Kevin Smith is famous from. And while we were there, Al Pacino came up, and he was talking about this Shakespeare play he was doing, because now he wasn't really doing movies. He was kind of doing the Shakespeare thing. And he was talking about this unknown actress that people were going to love named Jessica Chastain, and how he had put her in this, and now all of a sudden she was getting role after role, and she was going to be a massive name. And we were all like, yeah, okay, Al, whatever. Like, you just sit there and you roll your eyes because it's a Hollywood person talking positively about themselves so they can make themselves feel better. He was not wrong. Jessica Chastain blew up that year. She had a massive year. She's been one of the best actresses, of this generation for sure. And Tree of Life was really like, even though The Help was more in your face, to me, Tree of Life really shows off her acting chops, because what she's able to do just with her mannerisms and her face and not an accent is really, really impressive. And I love this movie. I really, really love this movie. That's why I have it at number 64. The first time I watched this movie, I didn't love this movie, but I do love this movie now. And I'm going to close the story real quick. But John, I'll let you hop in here and say what you thought the first time you watched it.
Yeah, because this was my first time watching The Tree of Life, and it was a really interesting viewpoint for someone like me who spends a lot of time investing in Tarkovsky and things like that, because you can definitely see Malick's pulling on that Tarkovsky influence. I texted you as I started watching this movie being like, yo, this is just Mirror. And it does have that type of symbolism to it, and it's pulling on a similar themes as Tarkovsky did in Mirror. But the spectacle of this film is really what brings it all together. Malick's vision for this film is incredible, and it is one of the most gorgeous films you'll ever watch.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's what gets me with this movie. So the first time I watched it, I didn't really know what to expect. The trailer blew my mind, and then I went in and I watched it with one of my friends. And when it was one of those movies where we were like, "What the hell are we watching?" I mean, we were 19 years old, whatever, and we're like, "What in the world is going on?" And I remember when the dinosaur finally came out and steps on the other dinosaur's head. We went into one of those laughing fits where you're not supposed to be laughing, which is what's making you laugh. And we literally almost had to walk out of the theater because we could not stop, because my friend, as soon as that happened, he just goes, "What the fuck?" And that was it. And then it was just him giggling for the rest of it. And so I didn't watch the movie for a while. It didn't hit me at that time because it was just such a weird movie. We didn't know what to expect. It was beautiful. There was no doubt about it. The shot of Jessica Chastain walking towards the sunlight is, I honestly say, the most beautiful shot in film history. It is gorgeous. It is like, how did anybody do that? No, this movie did not win Best Cinematography. That went to the artist, in case anybody was wondering. But when I rewatched this movie, so Criterion had their 50% sale, which, by the way, they just ended one at noon today, so I'm not doing you any favors now, anybody. But they just had one that was 50% off. And when Criterion did their sale, I said, screw it, I'm going to buy Tree of Life. It was like $20. It's a gorgeous movie. I'm sure Criterion's going to have plenty of stuff that's going to go along with it, and that makes it fun. And sure enough, the book that comes with it, like, you don't even want to bend the pages because you feel like you're breaking art. And I watched it at night alone right before bed, and I was like, holy shit. Like, it just hit me. It just like devastated me. And then I just watched it again. This is only the third time I've seen this movie, but I just watched it again, and every single viewing, I gained so much more respect for this movie because of the statements that it's making about life and about belief and about, like, you know, hoping for something better on the other side, and like the struggles we go through with families and everything. And it says all of this with almost no words. It says it all with whispers and one of the most beautiful scores you'll ever hear. And just great acting performances, almost like pantomiming half the time. And I'm just all about it. And it just hits me on a level every time that I'm just not expecting a movie like this. So many people have tried this, and Malick has tried it, 10, 11 times, and he's probably succeeded twice. Days of Heaven and Tree of Life. A New World's not really like this. And I mean, everything that movie he did right after this with Ben Affleck was, what is that? To the Wonder or whatever. That movie sucked. But like, it's so hard to tell the story he's telling here. And while it feels like this is so avant-garde and so out there, it's really not. It's actually a very simple story about growing up with an abusive father and wondering what it was all for as you're living through this regret of saying the wrong thing to your father after your brother died. And you know, whatever it was, we never even find out what he said, and it's years later, clearly, because he died at 19, and now we see Sean Penn at probably in his mid-40s, late 40s, and still feeling this guilt and reminiscing on how bad the father was to them and how it built them into this. But then also telling the point of view of Jessica Chastain's character, where it's, I believe in God so much, I believe in you so much, and yet you could create the earth, and you could create everything on it, and this entire prehistory, Big Bang into dinosaurs and all that, but you couldn't save my son from dying pointlessly. And it's this question, and it's that struggle that people have all the time with religion of, if God is so good, why do kids die? Why do children? All of that. When you have that, he does this in such a beautiful way that it's to me, it's just a devastating movie, but it lulls me into just this relaxation that I'm just like, that's life. There it is. It's playing out right there.
And one of the things I really appreciate about it is that, despite the fact that it is very heavy on the religious themes, it doesn't feel preachy ever.
At all.
At the same time. And it's just, because it's looking at life from this artistic viewpoint, it's not saying, oh, hey, there is a God, this is what's happening and everything. It's just saying that it's okay to believe this and to believe in this good, because good can happen out of it.
No, I totally agree. And that's the interesting aspect of this is never once do they say they don't believe in God, or never once do they spite God or anything like that. But there's still these questions of why. Like
Mhm.
why? And that's, I mean, I'm not somebody who's going to sit down and watch religious movies. Like, like the 10 Commandments, Ben-Hur, great. They're well made, but I'm not going to sit there and be like, "Whoa, like that's it, King of Kings." Like that's not, this is a religious movie. And Roger Ebert in the Criterion Collection thing, he gives his Cannes after it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. He gave his, he wrote his review, and it's in the Criterion Collection book that comes with it. And in there he talks about how this movie is literally Terrence Malick managed to film a prayer. He
Mhm.
managed to literally film a woman praying to God and trying to make sense of everything that God put before her, and a son praying to God, and how can he put everything that's in front of him. He managed to film that. How? Like that's the unbelievable thing. And while this movie is gonna be too slow, too weird for most people,
Most
which is
people.
fine, most people, this movie to me is just pure art. Like it's just
Mhm.
pure art. And like you said with Scream, 64 might not be high enough. The Tree of Life, I feel like this is a movie that's going to be timeless for me. Like no matter what age I'm at, it's still going to hit me on the same level, because you can relate to the son or the mother or the father. And the one thing that's a guarantee in life is that there's going to be loss, and there's going to be questions of what could I have done differently, or why did this happen, or regret over saying the wrong thing. That's always going to happen. And that's where, like, this movie, he hits all those themes, and he does it in such a poetic way. It's just unbelievable.
I think a lot of it comes to the fact that he's just approaching it from this way of like, rather than ever questioning like the meaning of life,
Mhm.
it's more this investigation of life. And I think the Big Bang into like the dinosaur sequence really does help promote that idea that we're looking and experiencing life in this film. And we should know that based on the title of the film.
Yeah.
But, sometimes movies have ambiguous titles that have nothing to do with what's going on. But it
Mhm.
really is just this investigation of how life operates from birth until death, because those are the only two constants in life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find, I mean, one of the things that I just find so beautiful about this movie is like, uh-oh. Okay, so John has completely dropped off. I don't know what happened to him. We'll see if he ends up coming back. We'll see where he went. But one of the things that I find so beautiful about the Tree of Life is the decisions that, okay, he's back. He's already back. John, you got to hang out with me. Where are you going? I
I
didn't.
don't like my camera.
John just doesn't like doing this. But what I was just saying is, what I find so beautiful, or what's so good about this movie is, I think about like the scenes of the kid swimming up through the door that's underwater. Like that's
Mhm.
him being born. And this, like these underwater shots in this movie, and the shots of nature, and this movie about the way of grace versus the way of nature. And you're seeing really how much appreciation Terrence Malick has for the world, the waterfalls, which are vicious and loud, and then these quiet nights in this small town with the streets, and like it's very silent, because at the end of the day, like so many movies, they'll add in all these extra sounds and sound design and whatever, and the sound design in this movie is beautiful. But when Jessica Chastain is standing on the corner waiting for her son to come home after her son just did whatever, I don't know if it was the party through the rocks or whatever it was, and or shot the kid with the BB gun, whatever it was, it's silent. You just hear the crickets and whatever, and the wind, and like it's such a, those are the things you remember. It's like if you move to a different place, the things you miss are the things that, like when you're trying to fall asleep, what are the noises you're hearing? What are the smells? Like your senses are what are overloading. That's what creates memory. And those are the things he focuses on while they're going through the memories of this child. I mean, I think it's brilliant, because he doesn't get into, oh, here's the dialogue that I'm going to have that's going to be 10 pages long, and Brad Pitt spelling out everything that's wrong with his life and all of that. It gets there, but you also understand why this guy is such a shitty person, because he hasn't
Mhm.
achieved anything he's ever wanted to achieve. And the end of his storyline here of, I never missed a day of work. I worked on Sundays. I did all this stuff. I did everything right, and they laid me off anyway.
Mhm.
it's something anybody can relate to, and especially the men of that era, that 50s, 60s era, just like such a broken mentality, such a helpless feeling. It's I don't know, I just love the way that it plays out in this movie, and I love the decisions that Malick makes in this movie.
Yeah, he just takes that moment to step back from everything and look at it. And it's something that we're just not used to doing a lot. I actually felt this earlier this week. I hate flying.
Yeah, I hate flying too.
Getting on a plane this week was like, oh my God, I hate it. But there's a moment on every flight I take where if I get a glimpse out the window and kind of just like look at the world, you get this moment of appreciation, just being able to like step back from everything and just appreciate the beauty of the world we live in. And that's how Malick's approaching this film. You don't need to see the nitty gritty in all of these situations, because just stepping back and looking at the bigger picture is so much more important to the themes of this movie.
Yeah. And at the end of this movie, we don't know if this is because Sean Penn has died. We don't know if he's now in like the afterlife, and this is what Malick's rendition of the afterlife is. Everybody reuniting on this beach and parents getting together, and Jessica Chastain seeing her son older than him. We don't know if Jessica Chastain's, if the mother actually is alive when he says the wrong thing to dad. Because what ends up happening is we find out that the kid died. We see Jessica Chastain dealing with that. Oh, you have the other two. And then we only hear Sean Penn ever talk to his father and say, Dad, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. We never hear him interact with the mother. We never know if the other boy is alive. We don't know what's left. And I think that kind of adds to the heart-wrenching part of this movie, is that we don't really know what either of these people have, but we also know that they're the two who are the most broken by the entire situation. The oldest son and the father, because the father doesn't want the oldest son to mess up the way he did, or, whatever, he sees himself as a failure or whatever it is. But by doing so, he's just abusing the shit out of his oldest son. And it's just one of those things that you still see all the time now. I mean, it's always happening.
Yeah. I mean, it's completely cyclical, and it's a thing that we do witness in life all the time, where because parents tend to parent the way they were parented, it's really hard for them to kind of break out of that cycle. And when they are feeling guilty and they're trying to provide a better life for their children, sometimes they get so caught up in what they perceive as the better life that they don't step back and look at the bigger picture and see that their children are not happy with the life that they're being given.
Well, and especially as we're watching this kid, the reason that he starts to do the things he's doing is because he's lashing out, because at home he can't do anything. It's so overbearing that it's actually starting to break him mentally. And those discussions of, how do I get back to where you are? How do I get back? Because now he's just totally broken. And I think one of the most interesting parts of this movie is when Brad Pitt goes away. And we see how happy everybody is, but then we also see him start to kind of take on the Brad Pitt role, where he's starting to break things and be angry at things and start to, he doesn't know how to act in a normal way. And for a movie that has this whole big bang and all this stuff with Jessica Chastain's character and what she's hoping for and what she's suffering through and all of that, it tells all three of the main characters' stories so well, but gives you enough of the Brad Pitt lookalike kid to still be heartbroken that he died at 19. And I think he might say 3 words in the entire movie. I think he says shut up, and I think he says like one other word, and that's literally all that kid says in the entire movie. And yet you're still able to capture so much just by him playing guitar outside.
Yeah, this is really a testimony to what Malick can visualize, and it's really impressive that he was able to capture this because of the quality of his other work sometimes, because nothing really touches this level where he's not focusing on an intellectual connection in here, which is interesting because it's a discussion of life, but he's really rooted everything he's doing in emotion, and that's how he's connecting to his audience. He doesn't have to say barely any words in the entire movie, yet every single scene captures the emotion he's going for to make the audience understand the undertones of everything that's happening.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, that's his style the whole time. If you ever saw Badlands, that's a pretty straightforward movie. That was his first movie. And then he made Days of Heaven, and Days of Heaven was a massive hit with Richard Gere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another one of these movies. A lot of it is just the emotion. A lot of it is just the beauty of where they are. It's set during like the Dust Bowl era. And just people trying to struggle for work, and they're out in this field with this house, and you know, it's a beautiful movie. And then he doesn't make a movie for 20 years. 20 years. And how does he come back? He makes a World War II movie. What? Him? But he makes it the way he makes it. And it's The Thin Red Line, which is just this total, it's you know, 100 characters. They barely have arcs. Most of them don't have arcs. Like, you know, but it's showing the horrors of war the way that he wants to show the horrors of war. And he comes back with The New World, which is just a retelling of Pocahontas and John Smith, but it's told the way he wants it to. And then he does the Tree of Life, and then his next two movies are absolute crap. I never even saw Song to Song. I don't even know what Song to Song really is, to be completely honest. But maybe it's good, maybe it's not. And I've always wanted to see A Hidden Life, but I just haven't gotten around to it. But he was on fire at the beginning, and then after Tree of Life, it almost got so pretentious that he was just trying to replicate what he had done with Tree of Life. And it was like, but you're not going to do that. Give me a different movie. Because his first, I guess, what is that, 5 movies? His first 5 movies, going from Badlands all the way through to Tree of Life, they're all very, very good movies, but they're all very weird. The Thin Red Line came out the same year as Saving Private Ryan. And it was funny because it was those 2 movies nominated for Best Picture and Shakespeare in Love nominated for Best Picture. The reason Shakespeare in Love probably won Best Picture that year is because of The Thin Red Line. Because people were split on which one they liked more, The Thin Red Line or Saving Private Ryan, because one was so artistic, and one, Saving Private Ryan is a very artistic movie, but one is blatantly artistic and more maybe realistic feeling, and the other is this epic. So now you have people voting for The Thin Red Line over Saving Private Ryan because they're so similar. That's probably why Shakespeare in Love ends up winning the Oscar that year. So you all can thank Terrence Malick for that. But if you watch The Thin Red Line, I don't love The Thin Red Line. I like it, but I don't love it. But it is the most unique war movie you're probably ever going to see in your entire life. It is bizarre. It is unlike anything you've really ever seen.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's nice about Terrence Malick, is because he took his time with some of these films, he really was able to just show his artistry and make the films he wanted to make. And that's kind of what we were at leading up to this point. And even now, he's never afraid to make his films. And he is, like I said earlier, he's reaching back into the influences of like Tarkovsky and Kubrick and these more auteur directors. But he still has his own special style to the way he's approaching it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's the thing. Like I know you were texting me. You're like, this reminds me of Tarkovsky and all of that. At the end of the day, yeah. I mean, I've only seen Solaris by Tarkovsky, but then again, like Solaris is also a very bizarre science fiction movie. So like I get it, but also like Malick is still Malick, and he's always going to be Malick. You know what I mean? Like that's just how it's going to be. He's Malick. He's always going to be Malick. He's never going to be anything else. He doesn't care. He didn't do it because he wanted to be famous or anything like that. That's why he didn't make a movie for 20 years after House of... I mean, Days of Heaven is generally considered to be one of the greatest American movies ever made. It wasn't on the AFI list or anything like that because not enough people have seen it. But if you start looking through critics lists and, you know, some of these like Criterion lists and like lists of people who really know film, that's normally considered one of the greatest American movies ever made. And he decided to not make another movie for 20 years after that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because he got screwed. It wasn't like the Michael Cimino thing where he makes The Deer Hunter and then turns around and makes Heaven's Gate, almost bankrupts United Artists, go 4 times over the budget, and then doesn't even get his cut released, so nobody sees it, nobody likes it. He just literally decided he didn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was content with the art that he was doing, and it's nice to have someone who's able to do that, because a lot of the times we do get those directors who feel rushed into another project, and then their next project isn't so great.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I, you know, so again, with like Tree of Life, like I know it's a heavy movie and it's all that, but I just love the beauty of this story. I love the depth of this story. I love how he manages to get into the heads of all his characters. I personally think Brad Pitt should have been nominated for the Oscar for this year. I think his performance in this movie is absolutely phenomenal. It's so subdued, and he was never going to win for it. But up until Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I really felt that this was his best movie, best performance ever. I just thought he was great in it because he plays that broken father so well with like his overly baggy pants and the chin, and just how you feel sick for him almost. You know what I'm saying? Like you almost feel sick for him all the time. And I just think that's so telling when you can do all of that with just so little. And best supporting actor that year was Christopher Plummer for Beginners, which he was great in that. But you look at some of the other people who were nominated: Kenneth Branagh, On My Week with Marilyn, Jonah Hill, Moneyball, Nick Nolte, Warrior, Max von Sydow, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I don't even think it's a trio. I mean, Brad Pitt, I think, should have won it, but if he wasn't going to win it, he should have at least been nominated over any of the other four other than Christopher Plummer. So just a phenomenal, I think it's just a phenomenal performance. I really do.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's so nuanced because of the way the story is being told. It's hard to notice how good these performances are on that first watch if you're not paying close enough attention to it.
Yeah, because it's all visual. It's all visual. And it's funny because this is a year where a silent movie wins Best Picture and the guy wins Best Actor for playing an all visual role. But you think about like this year, it's very funny because The Descendants was that year. So you had The Descendants, which is a very artistic movie, The Artist, and The Tree of Life. You had Moneyball, which was kind of weird. Midnight in Paris, which was pretty, mainstream. The Help, which is pretty mainstream. Hugo, which is pretty mainstream. And then you had War Horse and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which I have no idea how they got nominated for Best Picture. So you had very artistic movies, arguably some of the most artistic movies ever nominated for Best Picture in like The Tree of Life and in The Artist, because it was just so rare for a silent movie. And then you have two of the most clunker movies of all time, and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close and War Horse nominated for Best Picture. It's just interesting. Like that was a weird year. And The Tree of Life, I don't think people really knew where they were. I don't think 2011 really had much of an identity. And who knows why that is, but I do think that, Brad Pitt, Jessica Chastain, Ty Sheridan is phenomenal in this movie. I forget the name of the kid who actually plays the main younger son. I know Ty Sheridan plays the youngest son, and he's only in barely any of it. Hunter McCracken is young Jack. He's phenomenal. And then Laramie Epler, and then Ty Sheridan. Yeah. So, I mean, they all just do a great job. Sean Penn was phenomenal at ripping apart this movie after it came out. He's such a dick. It's really unreal, but he hated this movie. And he went on a huge press thing after this movie was nominated for Best Picture, talking about how Terrence Malick didn't know how to edit a movie, and this wasn't what the movie was supposed to be, and he hated that he was a part of it and all this stuff. He's such an ass. But he's also going to be in Licorice Pizza, and he's been in some of the greatest movies ever made. And he's one of the greatest actors of all time. But it was funny how this movie, he just went and just trashed everything about this movie after it was made, and he was a part of it. So that tells you, and he'd worked with Terrence Malick before because he was in the Thin Red Line. But that tells you, like, Malick's not even for the people who are in his movies half the time. And I wonder what the original script for this looked like, and I wonder what they actually thought they were getting into, because what does Sean Penn have 15 lines of dialogue in the entire movie, and it's 2.5 hours long?
Yeah. Although I'll say this, I didn't realize it was 2.5 hours long while watching it.
No, it doesn't feel like it.
No, not at all.
It doesn't feel like it because it's beautiful. Because at the end of the day, I mean, some of the visual effects, this wasn't nominated for Best Visual Effects that year. Your guess is as good as mine because it's flawless. It's flawless. When you watch a galaxy crash into whatever it crashes into, it's flawless. Yeah. So that's what I got on The Tree of Life, John. I freaking love this movie. I love it.
It's a very good movie. And the one of the biggest issues I find with it is that it's just going to be so hard to share it with people, because you're always worried that the person that you're sharing it with is just going to be you're just going to be so disappointed with their response to it.
Yeah, and it's funny because like most of my friends like love this movie. Like I said, the one person I went and saw it with, they didn't get it. They were like, "What the heck are we watching?" But most of my friends love this movie, and I love this movie. So it's an easy one for me, but at the same time, this isn't a movie that I'm going to say to people, yeah, you should go watch this. This is very much a movie where I say to people, it might be for you.
Yeah.
It might be, but I'm not going to recommend this to somebody because the odds are they're not going to like it. That's just a fact. That's just a fact.
But that's film for you.
That's film for you. I know. And that's why, something like this, hey, every movie's got an audience. And this is, this is one of those movies. All right. So it's been a long time. I didn't watch nearly as many movies as I would have liked to. But John, what was the best thing you've watched since the last time we came around?
So it was tough because I watched Shane about 2 weeks ago, like the day after we last.
Shane or Shame?
Shane.
Oh, Shane. Okay, got it.
Which was a great Western. But I'm going to have to actually go with the movie I watched on the plane ride home. Because I rewatched Olivia Wilde's Booksmart.
Oh, it's
and that has to be one of the funniest movies I have ever seen.
Such a great movie. I love the soundtrack to that movie. Caitlin Dever is so hot. I love Caitlin Dever. Caitlin Dever. Yeah. After that movie, I had the biggest crush on Caitlin Dever after that. Beanie Feldstein is so funny. I thought that movie was great. Her direction is phenomenal. I love that movie.
Yeah. It's honestly just because it's so it's just feels like one of those like early 2000s teenage romping coms and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's essentially like a female equivalent of Superbad without all the bad parts of Superbad.
That's a good point. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I remember talking about that with one of my friends where like Superbad is like, you're fat, you're stupid, you're this, you're that. And this was very much the female version of that, which is not as mean-spirited, which was kind of nice to watch, but it didn't pull punches. It didn't feel like it was pulling punches.
Mm-hmm. And I just feel like the message behind the movie is really great, and that it's really just like kind of investigating this idea of like, don't work your whole life.
Yeah.
Like have fun. It's okay to do that. And it just has such a positive message to it, and it presents it all in absolute comedic genius.
Yeah. Well, speaking of comedic genius, Step Brothers, I watched that today. I rewatched it. That is easily one of the funniest movies of all time. John says it's not, but John is a cranky baby who doesn't like special sauce or the Catalina wine mixer or the clown has no penis. John doesn't like that type of humor, but I sit there every time and I die laughing. I know it by heart. Adam Scott singing his abs. I haven't had a carb since 2004. I have the opposite of a problem. Punches him in the face. Like all those. It's just great little side moments. But that was one of 3 4-star movies I watched this week. So it was that one. It was Bambi, which I hadn't seen in forever. And Bambi is beautiful. Speaking of like a tree of life kind of thing, Bambi's a beautiful movie. But I got to go with the best one I saw this week was No Time to Die. I friggin' loved No Time to Die. I thought it was perfect. I still don't think Rami Malek is a very good actor, but sure, I'll let everybody else keep saying he is just because he has a cool jawline that makes him look like he's acting. I don't think that he's a very good actor, but I thought this movie was fantastic. I thought every decision they made was great. I think it's funny that there's this like theory going around the internet that it's woke Bond, but it's totally not. Like the whole like Black 007 thing like wasn't because that was being James Bond. Like it was very much just like that's who the new spy was. I thought that was awesome. I thought Daniel Craig, great as always. I thought the pacing was phenomenal. I loved Lea Seydoux, who I can never say her last name properly. I loved her in this movie. Ana de Armas, her performance in the very little bit that she's in it is so funny. I hope she gets a spin-off because I would sit down and I would watch that. I just thought it was so well done, and it was a proper send-off to the Daniel Craig Bond era, which was a gritty, dark Bond that felt realistic, and I thought this was a great send-off, and I can't wait to see what they're going to do when they decide to refresh the entire thing. Cary Joji Fukunaga did a great job. I thought it was a great movie. I couldn't believe it was almost 3 hours long. It didn't feel like it to me.
Yeah, no, it didn't, and I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I was sitting there thinking throughout the movie, I'm like, this is the best Daniel Craig Bond. Like, it's the best one. And I kept feeling that until you get to the last 10 minutes of the movie. And I was just like, oh.
Which is so funny because I thought the last 10 minutes were great because they actually went there. I didn't think they were going to go there.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's one of the, let's just spoiler alert it.
Spoiler alert, spoiler alert,
spoiler alert, spoiler alert,
spoiler alert, spoiler alert. If you want to leave, leave.
Yeah. Close your ears for the next couple of minutes, but it's just knowing that Bond is kind of this eternal franchise at this point and taking it that step further to actually kill the character. It just felt so wrong to me.
Oh, I loved it.
That might also be because I literally spent the last month watching 26 other James Bond movies in preparation for this movie coming out. I loved it. I really did enjoy the movie. It's a high class James Bond movie.
Yeah.
The staircase scene in the climax is easily the best shot sequence in all of James Bond history.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful film. It's touching. It's emotional. I just felt like an ending where Bond not being able to get his family is enough of a punishment for Bond, and death feels like a release from it.
Yeah, but I think that's why they had to do it, because I think it's more of torture for the Bond character. If he can't get his family, he needs his epic send-off so that nobody controls James Bond, because that's how it's always been. Nobody controls James Bond. And so this needs to happen. And this goes into the whole thing of, like, you know, the people who are like, I have a theory that 007 just keeps getting changed around. And it's like, who cares what the theory is? It's just James Bond. But this is a nice one because so many times, like we all know with the Sean Connery thing, it was a contract dispute. And then George Lazenby just wasn't a very good Bond, despite the fact that he's in one of the best Bonds ever. Roger Moore just started to become so old. It was like, when is he finally going to stop? Timothy Dalton, they didn't know how many they were going to have him for. And then Pierce Brosnan comes out, and his last two are such garbage that nobody wants to do anything with him. This was the first time that they really knew that this is going to be the last Daniel Craig one. Like, they knew it was going to happen, and they were able to give him a proper send-off. And I thought it was a phenomenal movie from start to finish. I thought the pacing was great. I love that the first, like, half hour is almost quiet. The top review on Letterboxd for this is from Jonathan Fuji. It says, Ana de Armas can kill me, and I'd say thank you. And you know what? I'm with you, man. Ana de Armas is perfection in this movie, and I wish she was in more of it.
Oh, that was, like, one of the only negative things you can say about this movie is how little of it she's actually in.
Yeah.
But overall, the fact that it's harkening back on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which finally has gotten to the point where it's not just the underrated James Bond movie. It's finally being recognized as, like, this high caliber James Bond movie that it's always been. And yeah, this movie, we had kind of gotten to a point with, like, Skyfall where it had become very clear that all these theories about how James Bond worked, about whether it's, like, the same person or not, has been thrown out the window. The Daniel Craig era with this film is capped off and is its own series of 5 films.
Yep.
They don't fall in with the other ones at all. They are their own thing.
And that's good.
Yeah, it's a great way to enjoy them because they are some pretty great films.
Yeah, and I want to throw out there one time with this. Christoph Waltz, nobody does so much with so little like Christoph Waltz does. He is so good. His performance in the one scene or two scenes he's in is so good. It's so entertaining. I loved it. Like I said, my biggest knock is that I just don't think Rami Malek's a very good actor. It's my biggest knock.
It's okay. He wasn't in that much of the movie anyways.
Yeah, he really wasn't. And that's, that also harkens back to old Bond, though. It's nice sometimes when the villain's not in too much. Goldfinger, he's in, like, the whole thing, but Doctor knows in, 2 minutes? Like, sometimes it's nice to go back to that. But anyway, let's talk about Scream so that I don't go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. So, John, you already kind of talked about why it's up there, but this deconstruction of the slasher genre, which you have plenty of deconstructions in here. We'll be talking about The Cabin in the Woods later. What is it about Scream, man?
So, Scream, spoiler alert. It's not really a spoiler alert. I didn't see Scream for the first time until about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I didn't see Scream for the first time until about 5 years ago.
Yeah, and which is crazy, especially for people our age, because it was everywhere when this movie came out.
Everybody wore the mask for Halloween. Everybody.
It was impossible to get away from Scream. And I just remember, like, all the hubbubaloo about it, and my parents just being like, you can't watch this movie. And then watching this movie and being like, I can't believe you deprived me of seeing this film for so long, Mom and Dad. But to understand Scream, you really need to understand, like, the horror landscape at the time when it was released. Horror movies were very bad at this time.
Oh, yeah.
You had your couple, like, really good gems.
Silence of the Lambs was 5 years before it, but that was, different.
Yeah, it was different. Like, that was an Academy Award-winning, first Academy Award-winning horror film, and totally different than your typical horror movie. Before this, we had gotten to a point where horror was saturated by sequels. We had 7 Friday the 13th or 7 Nightmare on Elm Streets at this point, 8 Friday the 13th. Like, it was getting exaggerated. Halloween had gone on and done sequels without Michael Myers, with Michael Myers. Who knows what's going on with those at that point? Everything was all over the place, and there were no real original ideas in horror. You had the occasional one, like Silence of the Lambs. You had Sam Raimi's Evil Dead series was doing really well for itself.
That was in the 80s, though, right? I mean, that was far enough.
I know, and like that's how far removed we were. But at the beginning of the 90s, throughout the 90s, there was just nothing really good. You had Candyman, which was like your only really good horror movie at the time. But other than that, it was all just these sequels of these 80s franchises that had been going on and ruining the legacy of their original films. And to have Wes Craven, the father of one of these slasher franchises, come out and create this film that investigated all the tropes that were established, going as far back as Psycho, looking into like the final girl trope as it was presented in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, and then breaking it down and telling you he's breaking it down throughout the film.
Yeah.
But still making everything engaged because you know what's going to happen, but it still kind of surprises you at the same time.
Yeah. So, okay. So this era, there was a period of like the 50s and 60s, which was all haunted house. Yep. You know, Hitchcock essentially creates the slasher genre in 1960. But still, there was like this whole haunted house thing, blah, blah, blah. And there was like the 70s of like the psychological supernatural horror, Suspiria and The Exorcist and The Omen and this kind of stuff, where it was like all psychological, spiritual, ghosts, whatever. But they were moving away from haunted houses.
Yes.
But what started to happen was, as we see nowadays, especially, audiences didn't have the patience for that anymore. Poltergeist isn't as scary as, you know, whatever else. And so it was, let's start having hot teenagers get stabbed by people. Like, let's start having hot teenagers who just want to have sex with each other and run around and drink and party, make the bad decisions and get stabbed by people. Okay, great. But then what ended up happening was, while the first one, you know, Friday the 13th might seem original, Nightmare on Elm Street might seem original, all of that, it really is. Then they were like, let's make a sequel, let's make a third, let's make a fourth, let's make a fifth. And now it's just all the same nonsense. There's nothing going on here. But that was what people wanted. And that's what's so funny is like Scream comes out in 96. I Know What You Did Last Summer comes out in 97. Because after 96, they still tried to make a slasher movie about these people. Like, they still tried to make a teen slasher movie that was the exact same thing as what Scream was making fun of the year before, because that's what people were going to see. And like, when I was watching I Know What You Did Last Summer the other day, I was laughing watching it because I'm like, people went to the movie theater and actually were like scared. Like, people were going on dates to see I Know What You Did Last Summer and being like, that was the best thing ever, blah, blah. It's garbage. It's total garbage. And that's what had happened after, like, before Scream had come out. Everything had just kind of turned into garbage, and there was no more psychological horror. I mean, even at the end of the day, The Silence of the Lambs is very much a different type of horror movie because it is psychological and it's out there and whatever. But Buffalo Bill kind of fits the slasher mold of like slowly creeping up on women and going to kill them and serial killer and all that. And like, really, these are just glorified serial killers that can just walk really, really slow and catch up to you anyway because you're going to trip or do something. But Scream just does such a great job in that first scene of like, why doesn't she just hang up the phone? I don't know, because she's Drew Barrymore and she doesn't want to. I don't know. But it just does such a great job of setting the tone right away that like, you're not supposed to take this seriously. What's your favorite scary movie? You've seen this a million times before, and she's going to make every single wrong decision. And that's just how it's going to be. And that's how this entire movie is going to go. And it's entertaining, that's for sure. And it became, I mean, this is one of the most iconic horror, if you even want to call it horror, movies of all time because of the mask and everything that went away with it. And the opening scene to this movie, probably one of the top 5 most iconic scenes in horror movie history.
Absolutely. And especially what Wes Craven did. Wes Craven has Drew Barrymore, who's by far the most recognizable person in this cast at this time. And everyone went into this movie with this expectation. Drew Barrymore has to be the final girl. She has to be the final girl. She's the recognizable one, so she's obviously the final girl. And then to kill her off in the first 15 minutes of this movie, in this incredible sequence where you establish this kind of like home invasion, creepy, stalkerish serial killer who is still following the tropes of those 80s serial killers who were anonymous and hidden behind masks, so you didn't know what their faces were and everything. But Ghostface moves differently than those killers. Like you said, those killers were slow, meandering, come up, catch you because you fell down. Ghostface slinked around everywhere and moved fluidly. It was a different type of killer that hadn't really been seen. And we had our most prolific actor in this entire movie, maybe second prolific, but we'll get to that later. And
Courtney Cox was the most prolific, so. But yeah, she's dead right off the bat. And it still surprises you nowadays because when you show Scream to somebody who'd never seen it, my fiance had never seen it. When you show Scream to somebody who had never seen it, it blows their mind that Drew Barrymore gets killed right away because it's like, wait a second, I know who Drew Barrymore is. And they start to think, oh, this is going to be her big, this is when she started to become famous. You forget that she was famous as a child, then fell off the map and then came back because she went through that whole rehab, whatever situation. Yeah. And Scream was kind of her big comeback. It really was. But it wasn't the comeback in the way that you thought it was, where she was going to be the main character. Instead, it's Neve Campbell, who literally never did anything again.
Well, and the other thing is Drew Barrymore was supposed to be playing Sydney.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was originally what Wes Craven cast her for, but she insisted on being Casey instead. And it's prolific that decision was made because it really did change the scope of horror moving forward from that point.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is like it's a very fun movie. To be honest, I don't like the slasher genre all that much. I think it's a pretty boring genre. I don't really like any of the Friday the 13th. I don't like any of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. The first Halloween, I think, is overrated, which will probably piss a lot of people off, but it just doesn't do it for me. Like, I like the score. I think it's fun. I think it's interesting, but like, I don't sit down and be like, oh, Halloween, what a movie. Like, it just doesn't do it for me. But that being said, like, I do feel like this is a fun parody, you know, like this is understanding of the genre. And I always like when you can deconstruct a genre that is just so oversaturated. And, you know, we see that with the Cabin in the Woods, where it starts to be, what can we throw at these people? I mean, Cabin in the Woods is brilliant. I think it's great. If Joss Whedon had nothing to do with it, it might be one of my favorite movies of all time, but that guy's a clown. So, but anyway, I think Joss Whedon is so full of himself. I just can't stand him. But Drew Goddard gets all the credit for that movie. But anyway, like when I look at this, I just think like Scream does a really good job of what it's setting out to do. This is a movie for me that never had a chance to be a 4-star movie. Does that make sense? Like,
yes,
when I sat down and watched Scream, there was no way that a movie with this premise in this genre was ever going to be able to be a 4-star movie. It had no chance. And so really 3 stars is about as high as Scream could go, because I'm never going to sit down and be like, that was a perfect movie, or that was the greatest thing I've ever seen. Like, this is just not my genre. I don't tend to like parodies or anything like that either, depending on what it is. I mean, you know, Naked Gun or Scary Movie 2 is much better than Scary Movie 1, by the way, if anybody's wondering. But
that's a Scary Movie 1's essentially just our beat-for-beat remake of Scream.
Yeah, and Scary Movie 2 actually starts to do some funny stuff. I know. I love Scary Movie 2. I think it's hilarious. But that being said, like, this movie never had a chance. But there are some amazing scenes in this movie. And Matthew Lillard is such a great actor. He gets no credit. He gets just like tossed to the side because he was in the terrible Scooby-Doo movies and all that. But he's such a great Shaggy. He is so good at acting. I love his little, like, at the end, I'm feeling a little woozy. It's so good. And yeah, I mean, I just love it. I love everything. I mean, I love everything about like those types of elements of the movie.
Yeah.
But then you start to get into like, you know, certain aspects of it that just don't do it for me. Courtney Cox does it for me. David Arquette, he does it for me. But like the you know, certain elements of like being too winky. Oh, what do you do? Like, you know, what's your favorite movie and things like that. Like it just doesn't resonate with me at all. I don't find the movie to be creepy really at all, which I guess it's supposed to be and it isn't supposed to be, but I don't get there. And yeah, that's really it. That's really what I got about that.
I think what I really enjoy about this movie as well is where it kind of takes this different approach to slashers. Is slashers up until this point was, your villain was this, as I said, like this anonymous shape who was a killing machine, but you always knew who they were.
Yeah.
Right? Like in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know it's Leatherface and the family of cannibals. In Halloween, you know it's Michael Myers. You know who these characters are. In Scream, a big part of the plot revolves around this idea of who is the killer. And it kind of adds that whodunit aspect to it without focusing too heavily on it, so that the plot's all about that. The series kind of forgets that the further along we get. Scream 3, because I just watched it again today and regretted it immediately because that movie's terrible, is so much on this whodunit mystery aspect of it that kind of misses what made Scream good in the first place. And that is that the whodunit's this backstory to this emotional journey of this girl whose mother was murdered, and then all of a sudden her friends are being murdered as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. Like, that was the one interesting thing is, like, you have Courtney Cox, who's just the vulture, who's going around and doing all this stuff. And she's writing a book about it. How can she make her money? I mean, how disgusting, and maybe you disagree, but I find it so disgusting. Like, all the doctors who have made their millions of dollars off of the pandemic here because they wrote a book about it. And now they're promoting New York Times bestseller as they're going on TV every day to talk about, oh, well, I think we need to do this and that. Let's keep selling books. That's all they're doing. And that's what she's doing here. Oh, let me take this murder. Let me take this woman being murdered, and I'll figure out how to do it and just make as much money and become as famous as possible. And it leans into that cliche and all of that so hard. But you're right. There's never really a point in this movie, like when it could be Bobby or Billy or whatever his name is, when it could be him. And then you don't really care, though, if it's him. You don't really care who it is at all. And then at the end, when it's like, hey, it's the two of these people, it was actually them the whole time. It's like, okay, great. Like, that's fine with me. Like, I'm all in on this. Like, that it was two people doing the same thing and they used a voice recorder and all of that. Like, I like that.
Yeah, and then even like the idea of there being two killers is, again, one of those ways that Wes Craven took your expectations and kind of subverted them, because it's never two killers before. It's always one killer. But one of the things with slasher flicks, especially in the 80s, was how is this killer getting everywhere all the time? And he's answering that by telling you there's two of them.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's just those aspects of it that really help elevate this movie for me, is that Wes Craven obviously benefits from being one of the fathers of the slasher flick genre and like being one of the major innovators in that genre. But he understands the genre and he's able to turn it on its head while still making a slasher movie.
Yes. And that's the weird thing. Like, and like tonally, he got what he wanted. But for me, I'm like, oh, the tone's all over, but it's supposed to be all over because he's making a slasher movie that's meant to be a comedy, that's meant to be winking at you, but it's also supposed to be kind of scaring you, and it's not, but it is. And it's like, for me, it's like it again, this is a genre that's just never going to hit that for me. It's just kind of that in between. This is where we are. It's just in the middle. There's nothing I can do about it. And that's where it is. But I think what Wes Craven does in this is really good. I like that he leans in really hard on all of like the teenage whatever and like, you know, the attention and stuff like that. I like how many careers it kind of went with. I love that Harry, what's his name, is in it. The Fonz. I can't think of his name. Henry Winkler. Thank you. I love that he's in it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that those are all fun elements. And like every time that it seems like, oh, this is your comic relief character, nothing's going to happen to them, then they get killed. Yeah. And like, so you're taking a comedic moment and then having it be serious because they just got murdered, but you know, it's still funny. So it's a very weird tonally movie, but it's supposed to be. And so that's where it's kind of like it's a very interesting movie. It's very, very interesting.
Well, and then even if you look at some like the kills and everything, because the body count in this movie is actually pretty low for a slasher movie. And when you get down to it, only one main character dies in this entire movie that isn't the killers.
Yeah.
And that's Rose McGowan's character, Tatum.
Yeah.
And I mean, talk about the most ridiculous death in the entire movie.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it has that back and forth, that silent back and forth, where she's interacting with Ghostface. And Ghostface isn't saying anything, but they're still having a conversation with each other. It is just done so well. And it's poking fun at the genre, at the idea of the sexually promiscuous girl has been cornered by the killer, and now the killer is going to kill her, and she has to run away. But she's making fun of it because she thinks it's someone making fun of it. And that's where this movie is really good, because it has that meta commentary of, you know, the rules. How do we avoid things when we know the rules? In fact, that rules conversation is one of the best scenes in the entire movie.
Yeah, the whole rules thing. And yeah, because at that point it really is. I mean, people nowadays might not resonate with them as much, because it's like our generation, for us, it's kind of like the found footage film. That's kind of what is more of like needs to be made fun of for our generation. Whereas like we don't get as many slasher movies. Like now we're like, our version of a slasher movie is It Follows, which isn't a slasher movie at all, but it's that same thing of like, just gonna walk and follow you, and I'm gonna get there eventually. Like that type of movie. But like, you have to think that at that time, everybody had seen that happen 9,000 times. They had seen it happen every single time. You knew exactly what was going to happen every time you went and saw one of these movies. The same way, every time you go and see a Halloween movie, you know exactly what's going to happen. Or every time they reboot the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know exactly what's going to happen. It's always the same stuff. It's always the same stuff. And so to have the balls to just have that conversation at a time when that wasn't really happening in movies, even in like parody things like that, they weren't laying it out so blatantly for you. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the meta commentary goes into, Casey does say, I've seen that movie 20 times.
Yeah.
And Randy is literally sitting there reciting movies as he's worked the video store, and he knows all the rules of the horror movies. And the characters understand what's happening around them, but they're still falling victim to the circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is what ultimately like makes it fun, is that even though they know everything that's going to happen wrong, and they know how they should face it and all that, they're still not. Like, they're still losing. And it's almost like, oh, it's almost justifying why the killers are able to kill everybody in all the other movies that aren't comedies and aren't making fun of it, because it's like, even when they know it's coming, they still can't stop it.
Yeah. And if we really get into some of the meta humor here, there's a lot of references to a lot of movies in this.
Yeah.
I mean, Tatum at one point says that stop, it sounds like you're in some Wes Carpenter movie.
Yeah, instead of John Carpenter, Wes Craven. Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Fred the janitor, played by Wes Craven himself, who's obviously wearing Freddy Krueger's patented striped jacket or striped sweater and fedora. There's the scene where Randy's watching Halloween by himself on the couch, and he's saying, "Look behind you, Jamie," and the actor's Jamie Kennedy.
Jamie Kennedy, and somebody sneaking up behind him. Yep.
Yeah. It's just these clever little nods that Wes Craven puts in the film that are there for the attentive people, the people who are really paying attention to it. And the people who are most going to appreciate this are the people who have seen those slasher films 20 times over.
Yeah, of course, because they're the ones who are going to laugh at that and say, haha, look at what's coming. Look at that. Oh, there it is. Like Jamie Kennedy. Like, how many people actually know that that guy's name is Jamie Kennedy as they're watching him say, Jamie, look behind you?
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, we still get, like you said, we have Courtney Cox in this movie, who we haven't even talked about, really, who's this annoying, this really annoying reporter who's at the height of Friends fandom at this point, and is kind of in this character, and then kind of has this weird love story with David Arquette's really doofy deputy.
Doofy doofus.
Yeah, doofy doofus. And it's just, there are some things in this movie that just subvert you so much, where it's like, this makes no sense. Why are these two like hitting it off like this? It makes no sense the further into the series you get either, until you get to Scream 4 when they're actually married. But it's so enjoyable. And then it's that dynamic duo of Skeet Ulrich and Matthew Lillard just brings it all together, because their energy is just so high the entire movie.
Yeah, I agree. Skeet Ulrich's actually very good in this, which is
not something you usually say.
No, and Matthew Lillard goes so over the top that's fun too. But yeah, I agree. Like they do a good job of like with Rose McGowan being the way she is, and then having Matthew Lillard and Skeet Ulrich, and like getting all of them to really lean into what we had seen those characters do all the time. You know, and yeah, the Courtney Cox, David Arquette love story. It makes no sense, but it's like, that's it.
But it turned into a real life one anyway.
That's it.
So.
Yeah, exactly. That's the funniest part, is that actually ended up lasting. But, you know, it's like, why did that happen? I don't know, because the reporter and the cop always fall in love in these movies. Like, there's always some sort of BS love story that happens between two characters where there should be no love story at all.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I honestly think, because I rewatched Scary Movie this morning as well, because I've been on this big slasher kick lately. And I think the first Scary Movie doesn't work because it's trying to be a parody of a movie that's already parodying things.
Yeah, that's true. That's a fair point.
It misses that meta commentary. But Scream, what Wes Craven did with Scream, and unfortunately, like this, I love the Scream franchise. Yes, Scream 3 is atrocious, but Scream 2 and Scream 4 are both very solid entries into the franchise, and I'm really looking forward to Scream 5 in January. But what Scream did was it made horror mainstream enough so that we got things like the Blair Witch Project and the Sixth Sense 3 years later. It made it so that we could get to the point that we're at today, where horror is an accepted genre, where it can be bigger than these low-budget films that it used to be prior to Scream.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. That's a fair point because, yeah, instead of just being, you know, the Ninth or Freddy versus Jason or whatever the heck is going on there, they actually do start to be able to put some thought back into these movies. But then I also think Scream kind of hurts the horror genre sometimes because it is so tongue-in-cheek, and then it is so making fun of the horror genre that some people then relay that to other movies that don't necessarily need to be made fun of.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, because we see that a lot where people will be like, oh, we knew that was going to happen. And it's like, why do you need to break down the Babadook? Like, just watch the Babadook. You know what I mean? Like, just watch the movie. You know, so it can help and it can hurt, but then everybody also wants to pretend that they're as clever as everybody who's in the movies that they watch. And then that ends up happening with this.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah, I agree with you. Scream 4 is very good. I don't know if I've actually ever seen Scream 2. I did find Scary Movie to be funnier before I saw Scream. And then Scary Movie 2, though, I still find to be hilarious because I just think it's so over the top, and it's actually much more of a comedy, whereas Scary Movie 1 is just more of like a spoof. Scary Movie 2 is much more of like, we're going to actually like get into like full-blown comedy, laugh out loud moments. Chris Elliott's hilarious in it, so yeah.
I think the fact that Scary Movie 2 is also doing the haunted house ghost and like supernatural horror stuff was a lot better of a thing to parody than the slasher genre at that point.
I agree. And also like doing like The Exorcist at the beginning, like more, they were more willing to kind of make it into like a Saturday Night Live horror version rather than like, let's try to make this like a shot for shot remake, like you said.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's Scream. You got anything else you want to say about Scream?
No.
Good. Because we're going to bed now because John just traveled and I have to travel tomorrow. So let's go to sleep. But we'll be back, John. I'm thinking probably next Wednesday again, probably after Survivor and all that fun stuff, just because I'm not going to be around this weekend, so I'm not going to have time to watch both movies. But we're going to be talking about The Birds from 1963 and Inglourious Basterds from 2009. The Birds is John's movie. Inglourious Basterds is mine. That'll be a fun week. The Birds is, I always find to be like a half horror movie. I guess it's supposed to be a full horror movie. But that'll be our Halloween week movie. So there you go. It'll be The Birds and Inglourious Basterds. We ended up keeping the horror going the entire time because we took a week off in between there. And then we get immediately into Christmas season when we do Kiss, Kiss, Bang, Bang and A Very Long Engagement because Kiss, Kiss, Bang, Bang is replacing It's a Wonderful Life. And then we do Spotlight and It's a Wonderful Life because we had It's a Wonderful Life one movie away from each other on our top 100 list. So one more week of Halloween, and then we get immediately into Christmas just like everybody else does. So that's it. The Birds next week, Inglourious Basterds next week. We'll be back probably next Wednesday if that changes. You know, just keep an eye out on your phone. Make sure you subscribe so you know. But thanks, John. Always a pleasure.